Hello, I'm Scott Simon, Simon Says, and this is a special episode. It's a personal episode, and I'm titling it My Unusual ESP in Las Vegas, October 1st, 2017. If that date doesn't ring a bell, a year ago today is when 58 people lost their lives when a crazed man began shooting from the 32nd floor of the Mandalay Bay Hotel. There was a music festival outside, and he planned this with automatic weapons. It's a day that'll live in infamy in Las Vegas, where I live now. And it's unusual because the story I'm about to tell is true. I'd only lived here 7 months, exactly to the day. I moved here March 1st, 2017. But what happened on October 1st, 2017, especially considering where I was at the time, in the condition I was in, makes this story very unusual. And after you hear it, some of you are not going to believe it. But hopefully at the end of this episode, I'll explain an example of where I had some ESP earlier in my life that actually came true. But this episode actually begins on September 28, 2017. At that time, I had been in a coma for 3 weeks after a heart attack and double pneumonia. That day, I finally awoke from the coma. And what was my condition at the time? Well, the good news was I could remember things, so I didn't have any brain damage. The bad news was I had no sense of reality. I knew I was in a hospital, but as I looked out the window, I didn't know exactly where I was at. I'd always had a good sense of what was north, east, west, and south. I guess that's why I got into news. So I was still groggy. My memory was intact, and I was very weak physically. I had lost 27 pounds in those 3 weeks being in a coma. I couldn't even move my legs. I had to actually take my hands to move my legs to the side of the bed, and even then, I could not stand up. In fact, it would probably be another 10 days before I was able to stand up out of bed. So I was still in pretty bad shape on September 28, 2017, but at least I was awake at times and able to watch television, finally eat just a little bit. And then October 1st happened. I remember the afternoon I was watching television. I was becoming more alert than I was a couple of days earlier. I had a light dinner, a very light dinner, and as I often do after dinner, I took a nap. At about 9:30 on October 1st, I woke up, but I woke up after having the most eerie dream I had had in a long time. And my dream was this. I dreamt that many people were being shot. I didn't have a particular location, and I didn't have a type of scenario of why these people were being shot. It was just that a lot of people were being shot in my dream. A nurse walked by, and I turned to her and I said, "Can I ask you a question?" And she said yes. So I asked her, "Has something happened tonight where a lot of people have been shot and they've been brought into the hospital?" And she looked at me, and she didn't give me that look that you're a crazy man. No, she probably had heard these type of utterances from others who had been in my condition. She looked at me with a normal look and she said, "No, everything's fine." I said, "Okay, thank you." And I sat there and I just thought, well, that was bizarre, having that kind of thought. And I went about my business, which at that time was just staying in a hospital bed, trying to recover and get stronger. So I was awake again. I turned on the television, but I started hunting for channels that might have news. Naturally, I turned to the cable channels, but they had nothing, which is usually the case on Sunday night. Cable news isn't that good on Sunday night. I turned to the local channels here in Las Vegas, 3, 8, and 13, and Channel 5. I should not leave them out. They're the local stations that do news, and they had regular programming. So I thought, well, just another one of Scott Simon's crazy dreams. My dream happened before the actual incident happened. I woke up about a half hour before it started to happen, the shooting from Mandalay Bay. I believe it was right around 10 o'clock local time. I fell asleep again. That's just how I felt at that time. I wasn't very strong. I would be up for a while, go to sleep for a while, be up for a while. After all, I was in a coma for 3 weeks. So I had the sleeping part down pat. About an hour and a half later, so it would be close to midnight, local time, Las Vegas time. I woke up, turned on the television, and sure enough, there was a live shot from the streets of Las Vegas, and I heard the words from the street reporter, "People are being taken to the hospital. We don't know how many have been shot." And I just thought to myself, oh my God. I dreamt it, and it happened. Now, I'll be truthfully honest. I had no idea it was going to be this big. Remember, my original dream was maybe 6 to 12 people had been shot. In the case of the Las Vegas shooting, 58 people died, dozens more were wounded. But I still had that mindset in my mind that something like this had happened. And so naturally I was transfixed. I continued to watch TV, but this time not thinking of my ESP, but my interest in the story as a news reporter and how it affected me as a new Las Vegas resident. About 2 hours later, and this would be about 2 o'clock in the morning, I looked out in the hallway, and that's when it hit me. I started seeing extra hospital personnel coming into work, called in for the emergency. People wearing green scrubs. I figured that the victims would be taken to UMC Hospital here in Las Vegas. It's the #1 trauma center. The hospital I was at was a much smaller hospital, and I don't know if they were set up for this type of trauma. But at that time, with so many people shot, and we're talking hundreds, we're not talking, just, 58 people died. But when a gunman shoots over 1,000 rounds of ammunition into a crowd of packed people, a lot of people are going to be hit. And eventually it reached my hospital. They had to be taken there because the other hospitals couldn't handle the number of victims that were coming in. I felt sad for what happened. I felt a little bit scared for thinking of something that I had thought of, and then this happened. And for the next day, I just became more alert. I knew I was going to recover. The power of the mind can heal the body, and it did. The next day, I asked the nurses to take me to the window in my room. And the reason why is on television, and this would have been about noon, about 14 hours after the shooting had started, because they were reporting hundreds of people were lining up around hospitals to donate blood. So sure enough, I looked outside my window and I could see the line forming. And I felt bad because I couldn't give blood in the condition I was in. But I felt good that people responded in the way they did in the new town in which I lived. I had no idea how Las Vegas would react. I'd only lived here 7 months. I knew how they would act in St. Louis, where I lived before. And that's my story. I eerily had ESP, dreaming a lot of people were being shot somewhere in Las Vegas. Not to the degree of which it happened, but I had that thought. Some of you are going to doubt my sincerity, my honesty, and that's okay, because ESP isn't one of those subjects that people understand, and I don't even understand. But I know I have a degree of it. It's a small degree, and I knew this in 1984. I was working near Joliet, Illinois. And in the summer that year, my then girlfriend and I were driving on Interstate 55 just south of Joliet, passing by the mobile refinery just south of Joliet. And I commented to her that one day, one of these refineries around Chicagoland are going to blow up. And she looked at me and she thought I was nuts. And I told her that the process to make gasoline is a volatile one. It's called cat cracking. Separate crude oil into the products we use, like gasoline, lubricants, things like that. Well, sure enough, some weeks later, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks later, I was about ready to cover a government meeting on a Monday night in a small town, Coal City, Illinois. It's the town I lived in, so I knew all the people at City Hall and the police station. So I was in the police station in the dispatcher's office, as I often would do before covering a meeting, sitting with the dispatcher. Then all of a sudden we heard a big boom. It wasn't an explosive boom, but it was a boom you could tell. And I remarked I thought it sounded like two locomotives hooking up miles away that were going a little too fast for the coupling action. Next thing we knew, seconds later, we were hearing police and fire traffic that they needed equipment and personnel at the Texaco refinery in Romeoville, Illinois, because it had exploded. And it was right at that time I thought of what I had said just a few weeks earlier to my then girlfriend, that one of these plants would blow up. Well, I left that day. I left Coal City Village Hall to go cover this story about 25 miles away. Around 18 or 19 people died. It was one of the bigger breaking news stories that I've covered in my lifetime. I was too busy that night to think about what I had said a couple of weeks earlier. But when the emotion and the event died down, I did think of it. Why did God give me this somewhat gift to be able to predict in advance some of these things that would eventually happen? And I summarize with this, that the event in 1984 made me think about doing things in life, planning in advance as much as possible. I wouldn't be able to predict most of the things that would happen in my life in advance. But I said to myself, if I would take the time to plan in advance, maybe good things would happen to me. Or maybe I would have an easier life. Today, I haven't always felt that way. I've always tried to plan in advance, but life gets in the way. And it's because we live in a life with other people who have free will, and at times we're at their mercy. Well, that's my story about October 1st, 2017 in Las Vegas. Today, think about those 58 people who attended a music festival on the South Las Vegas Strip, going to have fun, never to go home again. And to the hundreds who were wounded that night and are still recovering from their injuries. And think about me. Not that I'm anything special, but think to yourself, there are people out there that have some special gifts, and that you'd like to get to know them and get to know a little bit about them and what makes them tick. That's my thought about October 1st, 2017. It's October 1st, 2018. I'm grateful to God every day that I'm breathing air, because on September 8th, 2017, I went down for the count with a massive heart attack and double pneumonia, and I wasn't given very much of a chance to live. Doctors and nurses made it happen. So that's my story. I hope you enjoyed the episode. My eerie ESP of Las Vegas, October 1st, 2017. I'm Scott Simon. Simon Says. Our next episode later this week will be bonus content with Jeff Riggles, online editor of Capital Newspapers. We're going to talk about his personal blog and online journalism. Until then, so long from the greatest city in America, Las Vegas, Nevada.